They thought that they had to outlast the Israelis, so they were hoarding a lot of their missiles. In the next war, I suspect that their strategy will be very different, because they will most likely conclude that they have to very quickly inflict a significant amount of damage on Israel in order to dispel any notion in Israel that Iran can be turned into the next Syria or to the next Lebanon. And it is because the only deterrence Iran at this point really has, because clearly their air defense systems were not much, the only real deterrence they have is their offensive capability, their ability to inflict pain on Israel if Israel attacks. So I suspect and I fear that the next war will be a much more intense, high casualty event from the very outset. And particularly if you have high casualty incidents and events on the Israeli side, that will dramatically increase the pressure on the United States to get much fully into the war. And that will then also be a very different war than the attack that Trump did, because that was a one-off. It was very limited. In essentially, the US was at war for about a day. That's it. And part of the reason why some of those other scenarios that many had predicted, myself included, did not come about was precisely because this wasn't that war. It wasn't a full-scale invasion. It wasn't a full-scale bombing campaign against the entire country. It was a targeted hit against specific places, and as a result, the Iranians chose not to counter-escalate. But if there is a much larger attack, then the Iranians are likely going to use whatever they have and probably not save them for another day, because there may not be another day.
How involved do you think the US will be in a second
war? I think
war?
the deeper this goes into the midterms, it will be more and more challenging for Trump. MAGA was not happy with this, but the reason why he got away with it essentially is precisely because it was a very quick event. No Americans died. This was not a forever war. It was not one of those things in which at the outset the exit ramp had not been identified. That's the problem with all of these previous American wars. They're so the objectives are so maximalist. There's no clear plan for victory. There's no clear plan on how you find a face-saving exit if you have to. So they end up going on for years and years and years. And that's something that the American public in general, but the MAGA base in particular, has become very sensitive to. That was not what happened in July. We should not misread that and think, oh, MAGA is totally okay with the war, because the next war may be very, very different, and then their reaction, I suspect, will be very, very different. And I think that the Trump administration understands.
You can't blame them. You can't blame them. Trump came in saying he'll end the Ukraine war very quickly, and he can end the war in Gaza as well. He wants a Nobel Peace Prize. But then now we're looking at the Ukraine war. We saw the U-turn he did on Ukraine. That came as a surprise to many. And we're seeing the war in the Middle East expand, and now Qatar being struck. So I think that Russia continuing the war in Ukraine, obviously I want the war to Ukraine to end more than many, but Russia continuing that war in Ukraine is one could look at it as a strategic advantage for Iran, because they're spreading the US thin, not allowing the US to be able to support Israel in another war to the same extent they possibly did in that 12-day war. Because now a lot of people are saying that the US does not even have the capacity to support Ukraine if they chose to be able to win this war, to at least have some sort of advancements.
That's the problem of these endless wars. I mean, it just completely depletes you. And it erases any ability to make strategic prioritization.
It is sad to see what the US empire has done to itself. Now, I hope I'm wrong in some way, but every person I speak to, even those that are very pro-NATO, pro-US, anti-Iran, anti-Russia, it's hard it's hard to ignore how thinly stretched the US military is, and how well China's playing all this. China's strategy in not getting involved, but also supporting the right countries to keep spreading the US thin and keep those wars ongoing. Trying to play a big role in Russia's economy doing so well. And China's played a key role along with Russia in supporting Iran. We're moving faster and faster into that multipolar world. And what's really fascinating and just perplexing is that it seems that I thought, after the Iraq and Afghanistan war, the lessons have been learned. It's almost suicidal to see that same strategy is ongoing, to see the war in Ukraine to continue the way it is, and to see the Middle East how it is today. Can you maybe explain where you see China in all this, especially in the Middle East?
I think that's a great question because, and you hinted at it, China has played its cards very cleverly. China has managed to stay out of the troubles of the region, have excellent relations with Iran, with the UAE, with Qatar, and with Saudi all at the same time. They have their quarrels, and China stays way clear of them. Even has excellent relations with Israel and with Iran and with the Palestinians. And he has led with his economy and has not been pushing a military agenda. It has not offered to be a security guarantor to anyone. And as a result, some of these fears that exist in Washington, which is, oh, if the US leaves the region, the Chinese will come in and take over. I don't think the Chinese are that dumb. I don't think they're looking at military hegemony in the Middle East and feeling envious. In fact, I would not wish military hegemony in the Middle East to my worst enemy. It is not a valuable thing to have. I think history is quite clear. If the United States, with all of its military power, nevertheless suffered so tremendously by pursuing that hegemony, then others will suffer even more because they don't have the same margins that the US has. And we have unfortunately wasted much of those margins. What I think has happened now, though, or will happen now, is not that the Chinese are going to come in and say, hey, rely on us on security. Instead, they will recognize that the Gulf states cannot afford to break with the United States. In fact, I think part of the reason why you're seeing the Qataris almost exonerating the Trump administration for the Israeli attack, even though it is the American air defense systems that seem to have gone to sleep mysteriously, is because they recognize Israel wants Qatar and the US to have a very negative break in their relationship, and they're not going to allow for that. So they're essentially exonerating the Trump administration, and they're keeping it classy on the surface level. They're going to continue to have that relationship, obviously, but underneath it, they're going to diversify. They're going to go to other countries. We already saw that the Saudis made this deal with the Pakistanis. How much substance behind it, I don't know. But I do think there was an intent there to send a signal to the United States. Because who is Pakistan relying on for weapons? China. So going to Pakistan is to essentially to say, hey, we're moving in the direction, or we can move in the direction of China. We're not going all the way. We're going to one of the pit stops, essentially. And the Chinese, one GCC officials told me, has offered and come and said, look, we have all of these different air defense systems, and you can feel comfortable with them because neither the US nor we can turn them off, which is a hint that the United States actually has the ability to turn off all of the different air defense systems that is provided the GCC states. I wouldn't be surprised if that is the direction these countries will go. They will not break with the US. That would be foolish of them. But they would also be very foolish of them to put all of their security eggs in the American basket, given what happened. And given what I hinted at earlier on, that the US has taken off all of the constraints on Israel. I mean, I said this already before the Qatar strike. I said this a year ago, that if you're sitting in the GCC and you've been worried about Iran for quite some time, and rightfully so in many different ways, and you have all of these defenses against Iran that you bought from the US, but now you're seeing that with all of these restrictions lifted on Israel, you have to start worry about what that could mean for your security. Because if Israel is allowed to do whatever it wants with with full impunity, then it would be very foolish not to be worried about that. And apparently they weren't worried enough, and we saw that this happened. After this, I think there will be diversification in many of these different places. They have no other choice.
Yeah, I think that Saudi announcement is pretty consequential. We're talking about Saudi, probably America's biggest ally in the Gulf region. For now, can you give me your thoughts on that pact? Because we haven't really spoken about it. So I want to wrap it up by talking about the Saudi-Pakistani defense agreement, which is kind of like an Arab NATO, along with the meeting between all the Arab nations in Qatar after the Qatar strike. I think there's been talk about some sort of Arab alliance or Muslim alliance, I think called Arab alliance, not Muslim alliance, as a way to deter Israel. Could we see the structure of the Middle East, all these different alliances that are there, kind of being strengthened, all the rivalries being put aside in order to build that strong deterrence against Israel? And I'm talking here about Iran, Saudi, for example, or even Qatar and remember UAE, Saudi were all in Qatar, having the close relationship. Remember, these were rivals not long ago. So, yeah, I'd love to get your thoughts on those two
I
things?
think we will see that. I think we, again, without necessarily undoing the other agreements that exist. I don't think the Saudis are going to give up these implicit security guarantees they have from the US in order to just rely on Pakistan. That's not going to happen. What they're going to do is to have both, and perhaps a third one or a fourth one. It will be diversification. There will be movement in various ways towards something to make sure that there is some sort of a structure that also balances Israel. I have to say, though, that I am not enthusiastic about this, because to what I see is just musical chairs. For 30 years, the region was organized against Iran. Earlier on, it was against Iran and Iraq. And now we're playing musical chairs. So now the GCC will kind of mend fences with Iran in order to ally and balance against Israel. And then something else happens, and then they will shift it around over and over again. Ultimately, it doesn't provide durable security. What they should do, in my view, is to recognize it absolutely cannot be like an Islamic NATO or an Arab NATO, because it shouldn't be a NATO to begin with, and I'll explain why. And it shouldn't be like, oh, you have to have this ethnicity or this religion to be able to be part of it, because that